Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and this message, it comes from a translation of a message that I received, and the translation of that message, it reads like this. Hello, my brother, how are you? Can you please post my own story as hidden identity? My brother, I did such an evil thing that I never thought of doing. So what had happened to me is that I was a woman whom I can say that it was almost as if my husband had just died. He was no longer existing in my life when he was still alive. My husband was one who would go out there to drink beer. He used to drink a lot of alcohol, so much that when he would return back from work or from his drinking spree, then he would urinate and poo in the blankets, and after that he would demand that I should make love to him. This was when we were still staying in the village, my brother. Then my sister, my big sister, she was staying in the capital city. She then said to me, I know that you are suffering, you can come here to the city. I then went to the city and I then started working as a maid. But those people that I was working for, my brother, something that I have realized, one thing that I have realized about Christian is that most of them, yes, they can say that they pray a lot, but deep down, my brother, they are evil-hearted. And I can say that when I was working for this family, those were the people that made me to turn against God, because what they would do is that they would just leave me about only 2 slices of bread, and then they would lock the pantry. In their house, there was a pantry where they used to keep all of their food. So throughout the day, I would be working and I would only survive on 2 slices of bread. Then they would return back from work, sometimes late in the evening, and they would have already eaten. And the rule that the wife to that man that I was working for had given me was that I was not supposed to cook when she was not at home. This was quite a very terrible time for me. But anyway, I knew the way that my kids were suffering back home. I continued working even though it was really difficult. Yes, it was a difficult situation that I had found myself in, but I was able to provide just a little bit for my kids. But my husband, he then traveled from the village and he came and he started to fight with my boss. He said that I was sleeping with my boss. This was just a lie. That is how I ended up being fired, and he then dragged me back to the village. When we returned back to the village, he acted as if he was now all okay, because my brother, who was working in Harare, had promised him a job. So he started to pretend as if he was no longer that drunkard, he was no longer chasing after different women, but this was just a plan of his. He wanted my brother to call him to the city. After my brother had called him to the city, when he arrived in Harare, after he had settled down, he then called me and we started staying together in the city. But this was a very terrible period of my time. I was abused. He would beat me up, and when I would go to the clinic, he would follow me and he would say that he was sorry. Like when I was at the gate of the clinic, that is when we will both return back home, and he would buy for me some Panadol or anything so as to make the pain to go away. But after a couple of days, he would beat me up again, until this other neighbor of mine said that the way that your husband is beating you up, the next thing that is going to happen is that he is going to beat you up in a wrong place and in a sensitive place, and you are just going to collapse and die. What is going to happen to your kids? From that day, I can say that is when my husband died in my heart. This is what we do as women. We can stay with you whilst you are abusing us, but we reach a point in our lives whereby we just feel like you are no longer existing anymore. We just treat you as if you are dead. That is like the way that I was able to survive. My husband, unfortunately, he then passed away, and after my husband had passed away, I was left alone, and I didn't have anyone to help me to take care of my kids. I then returned back to the village. I stayed just for a little bit. Then there was this other little sister of mine. She had found this other man who was working at this other plantation that is there in Tanin. And when she found this guy on Facebook, after they had spoken together, she then traveled to meet up with that guy, and they became husband and wife. So my little sister then spoke with her new husband about my situation. The husband then said that since he was a foreman, he could actually make a plan for me. So when it was time for them to start harvesting the lemons, he then sent some money for me, and I came to South Africa. When I came to South Africa, I then started working on that farm. My brother, I never expected that I was going to fall in love so quickly. What happened is that there was another guy who was from Zim, the same age as I am. This guy, he then told me that he was in love with me. At that time, he lied to me that his wife had since passed away. But what had happened was that the wife was actually sick. She was really sick. So I don't know if he was ashamed to tell me that the wife was really sick. The wife had become so sick that her own people had came to collect her. So when he lied to me that the wife had passed away, I did everything that any woman will do. I fell in love with him. We then started staying together. So on that same farm that we were staying at that time, there was one relative that was like an in-law to my husband. So this woman was the one who was like now a TV station. Everything that was happening here in South Africa, she was telling her relatives back home in Zim. My brother, they went to those red garment prophets, and they wanted to make sure that I was going to die. I then started to feel like pains in my legs. I could not even walk. I would feel as if in my joints there was someone that was stabbing me with a lot of needles. So as for my little sister, she is one who has a gift. She then started to have a lot of dreams. She kept on telling me that she was seeing this other old woman that would come and stand at the front of my door, and when I would come outside, this woman, she would then throw some needles into my face, and she would start stabbing me with the needles that will be remaining in her hands. And at the end of the day, my sister was telling me that she saw me being buried, which means that I was going to die. I then asked her what I was supposed to do. She said, "Sister, let us return back home." So me and her, we then returned back home. I was so sick at that time, I could not even walk properly. When I returned back home, my mom felt so sad about the way that I was now looking. We then went to this other red garment prophet, but this red garment prophet, the wife was a traditional healer. So they were mixing church with African herbs. When I went there, they then started steaming me. They placed me inside this other room where there was a place where they had a fire that was burning, and there was a big pot that was full of water. So as the water was boiling, the whole room became so hot, my brother. I nearly collapsed because of the steam that was all over that room. And they told me that I was not supposed to get out of that room because they wanted to chase away the evil spirit. That woman said that when you steam yourself, you chase away evil spirits from your body. They steamed me, I don't know for how many hours, until I could not breathe anymore. I was being choked by the smoke as well as the steam that was in that room. They removed me from that room. I was weak. I could not even lift a finger. They placed me inside the consulting room, and they gave me some 2 clay pots. They said that these 2 clay pots, I had to hold them until the sun had gone down. So they had told me that the spirit that was tormenting me, it had been trapped inside the other clay pot, and the other one was more like a sacrifice. So they made me to hold this clay pot. As weak as I was, my brother, I would collapse. Then my little sister would raise me up because I was to remain kneeled. I had to kneel down until the sun had gone down. So from the prophet's compound, going to the river that was close to his compound. I can say that it was about a kilometer. I was told that what I was supposed to do was that I had to go to the river. Whilst I was like kneeling down like that, I had to crawl until I had reached the river. That is where I was supposed to throw those 2 clay pots. My brother, I can say that I started like crawling towards the river somewhere just when the sun had gone down, when people were no longer walking around. That was when we started walking. I was not walking, I was just crawling. It was like very painful. It was hours and hours whilst I was crawling. Whenever we would see someone walking around, the prophet will say, "Get on your feet." And once that person would have walked away, then the prophet will say, "Get down on your knees." So they led me to the river. When we had arrived at the river, that was when I was made to say a prayer, and the prayer was more like a go back to sender. My brother, I then threw those 2 clay pots into the river, and there was an explosion as if I had thrown a bomb into that river. And the prophet then said that the prophet said that the spirit had returned back to its sender. My brother, within a couple of days, I had a phone call that was from South Africa. It was from the man that I was staying with at that time. The guy then told me that his wife had passed away, and he was telling me this sad news, and I pretended as if I was really feeling sad, but I was happy inside, thinking that I had won this war. I returned back to Zanin, where I started staying with that guy that I was staying with. But my brother, the devil had other plans for me. One night, this was like late in the evening, like it was in the season whereby our boss was making us to work overtime, like way overtime. We would get back home at around 9 p.m. or so. So my husband, since he was using a tractor, so he would remain behind whilst we would go back to our rooms. So when I went back and when everyone had entered into their room, I was busy preparing some food so that he can come back and eat something, as well as some water to bath, because he was already on his way. I then had a knock, so I thought that maybe it was him, but I was surprised because the boss's car used to come, then it would park into the yard, and after that the boss would reverse. So I knew that when the car would be parking, I would see like the headlights flashing into our room, but there was no car, there was no headlights flashing into our room. I then thought that maybe it was one of my neighbors who was like looking for cooking oil or a milli meal, because this is what we used to do. When I opened the door, there was a woman, my brother. This woman, she was dead, and immediately I realized that this woman was that same woman who was once married to the guy that I was staying with. Her eyes were closed. I don't know if she had eyes or if she didn't have any eyes, but I saw nothing at the place where her eyes were supposed to be. There was nothing, just darkness. I saw this ghost. I started screaming, and I screamed out so loud that people came out of their rooms and they rushed to my room, and they started asking me what had happened, but I was ashamed to tell them everything that had happened, because no one knew these rituals that me and my little sister had done. I pretended as if I had been shocked by electricity, because the stove that we were using, it used to shock you a lot if you were cooking without wearing any shoes. But people were surprised, like the way that I had screamed. My brother, when that guy came back, whenever I would look at him, I would see that his face would be changing and it would become the face of a woman. Already, I had told myself that when it is month end, once I would have gotten my salary, what I would do is that I would then just run away, because everything that was happening, it was too scary. Whenever me and that guy would be making love, sometimes he would say that, "I can't see your your private parts. And when we would switch on the light, then you would say, now I see it. But most of the times you would miss the spot. In my mind, like when you would be making love to me, I would actually feel so much pain, like his manhood, it would be outside, but on his side, you would think that he is actually making love to me. This was just too much, and I then decided to run away. Before even if it was month end, I ran away, and I am now staying in this area with my friend. When I ran away, then that woman, she stopped like following me. I never saw her ghost or her spirit again. When you see a ghost, your life will change forever. The way that you view life, it will be very different. Your dear listeners, right there was a narration of a message that was sent to me by our dear sister.